Madam President and trustees, members of our community who've joined us in person and via live stream, we're so delighted to welcome Iman Hathaway today. Iman was a student that I had hoped to have share at our State of the Schools presentation. As a busy junior at Skyline High School, she had other commitments also going on that evening, so we were able to leverage her to come and share with us this evening. Iman, I'm going to give a brief introduction and then we'll have you up, okay? Very good. So Iman has just completed her junior year at Skyline High School. She participates in a wide range of musical classes and groups. She's been a part of the Skyline Band, the full orchestra, and the drum line for 3 years and plans to continue as a senior and a member of the class of 2020. Despite learning in a diverse environment, Iman has come to recognize that she doesn't actually fit into any specific group, which has led her to share her experiences in a talk on the social and racial issues that persistently create boundaries and unfortunately still impact her fellow students, and I would add all of us here in 2019. I had the great opportunity, and I believe Trustee Lazarus was present also, and maybe perhaps others. We had the great opportunity to hear Iman share this talk during the Ann Arbor TEDx event at Skyline High School several weeks ago. She impressed me so much that I reached out right away to see if she could come and share. As the trustees know, it is our practice to welcome Student Voice, and I'm just so delighted to welcome Iman Hathaway, if you'll come forward, and also give a shout out to Principal Corey McAmill in the audience. Thank you. Come on down, Iman.
I hated my name growing up. I used to tell people they could call me Emma because it was just easier. I hated the name Iman because no one in my small, culturally isolated town could pronounce it. And when I say small and culturally isolated, I mean out of about 7,000 people, my mom was one of the only African Americans. When I was a kid, I never really identified as Black, and no one really saw me that way either because I'm light-skinned. But that was also in part of the influence of my mom, who stuck out like a sore thumb and probably didn't want me to feel the same way. Maybe she tried to protect me when she would straighten my hair for every school picture, or when she would forbid me from using language that further set me apart from the culture that surrounded me, or when she would make me wear clothes that matched just so I wouldn't stick out as much as I already did, just being a weird kid. Of course, this never occurred to me until I moved to Ann Arbor. When I first moved here, I was exposed to this whole new melting pot culture of people. And as I went to a much more diverse school, I became aware of my race for what it was, as well as what it signified to others. I could finally recognize the differences that seemed to define how people acted towards each other. But what came with it was a scary feeling of just how much I didn't quite fit in anywhere. And if I didn't fit in Ann Arbor, where did I belong? One of the biggest differences between my old town and Ann Arbor was the language used by people here. Words my parents exposed me to, but at the same time kept me sheltered from when I was told never to use them. Words like nigger. To be perfectly honest, the most times I've ever used this word was writing this speech. I don't use it in my everyday language, in part because my family doesn't. Yet another way my mom raised me white, as some of my friends perceive it. But when it comes down to personal choice, I don't use it because I believe it is a word that carries too much weight to be used casually. Reclaimed. That's a term you hear a lot. It is a right earned from a debt that can never be repaid. I don't disagree with that. To not reclaim the N-word is like forgetting about the long-held, widely accepted racism that has heavily influenced this country. But I think teenagers living in this era, having never lived in a time of American slavery or the early civil rights movement, are desensitized to the original meaning of nigger. Who does this word really belong to? Does it not belong to the people bound by it? The millions who were ripped out of their homes and packed like sardines in the bottoms of ships. The people who were denied the right to vote simply because their grandfathers couldn't. The people who lost their lives for no good reason other than someone else thought theirs was inferior. The people whose suffering I can't even begin to imagine because I've never had to live a life of being owned. An outdated word that used to have the literal denotation of pain, it begs the question of whether this language should be used at all today. Does continuing to use the N-word colloquially just constantly remind us of this painful history? Does reclaiming it while excluding others not also manifest the conscious decision to self-segregate that keeps us separate? By using this word in a negative connotation, we might really just be taking 2 steps backward when constantly reminded of the hate and resentment it ensues. It keeps us hesitating on either side from forging relationships with people outside our scope of identity. On the other hand, is it possible to move forward without acknowledging the past? Sadly, I'd have to say, although this generation lives in a very progressive time period, nigger is still applicable to the racial oppression of 2019. Generations who have lived through times of horror in the early civil rights movement may argue we've gotten past the big barriers. When Black teenagers are getting shot in the street because the phones they were pulling out of their pockets must have been guns, I disagree. When everything our first African-American president says is overlooked until he produces a birth certificate, I disagree. When our leaders demonstrate on live TV how they applied their blackface, I disagree. To believe the oppression faced by many is just a thing of the past is simply naive. If we want to overcome these walls, it is important to remind ourselves of what nigger used to mean. It is important to remember how we treated each other so we may change the conscious decisions that kept us unequal. But it's just equally important to recognize how we treat each other today, to change the small, sometimes unconscious decisions we might not even notice in themselves construct invisible walls of hierarchy. The N-word is a reminder to do better, so we may strive to not make the same mistakes that make people feel like they will never fully be accepted, even if we didn't realize it. But in the grand scheme of things, nigger serves a greater purpose. Most importantly, it is proud. The kind of proud that hurts because you know how much pain and change came before you so you could reclaim it. It is a sense of community, symbolic of a shared experience, and it is strength when the world tries to cut you down. Growing up in a small town of mostly people who weren't like me, I had never felt that before. By now, you're probably questioning why I'm speaking here today. Am I really Black enough to give this speech? Am I too white to have an opinion on the matter? Unfortunately, I don't conveniently fit in a box that easily classifies me as one or the other. If you look at me, you might think I'm too light to really understand what it's like to exist in this world as an African American. But what you don't know is what it's like to be me. You might not understand what it's like to be 16 and still not know your place. Listening to the teacher call out your name and tell you she was expecting a different face. Having your friends tell you are not all of what you are made of simply because they cannot see it from the outside. To feel not just like you don't get it, but that you're not allowed to get it from either point of view. To be told you're not Black enough to be Black, but you're not white enough to be white. To feel the constant stress of knowing as hard as you try, you're still standing on the outside of the glass looking in. Sometimes I am so afraid to share anything about myself with a world that feels necessity to put a label on everything because I don't even know who I am. And that's pretty hard to figure out at an age where there's this constant pressure to find a group and consistently identify with it. But race shouldn't be the defining factor. Race shouldn't be a label. Every time someone looks at me and asks, "What are you?" I just want them to understand that what I look like isn't what makes me me. But hey, I'm prejudiced too. It's really hard not to be. Society has made it an unconscious decision to use our predisposed ideals to categorize everything, even someone we just met. But I think we can all do better. And when I say we, I mean everyone, not just the we that is one race or the other. We needs to come together to include everyone because right now as a country, we aren't much of a we. And maybe not, this stems from the invisible walls we put up. When it comes down to it, no one should be pigeonholed by race, especially not by a word. Nigger shouldn't define anyone because no one is just one thing. By blood, I'm not. But I am not multiple things because I am mixed. I am more than just the words on the checkboxes because I'm an individual. And so are you, so is everyone. Everyone exists in this world in different ways. Everyone has different hardships, values, and goals. To assume we're all the same is the very stem of prejudice. But there's an even greater danger at hand when you try to categorize everything. When you define, you divide. And what we should really be working towards is learning to respect each other's differences without letting them separate us. To be honest, my race is a big part of who I am. It has shaped my upbringing and my views, but it no longer stands in the way of who I want to be and what I want to do. I'm not here to tell all of you what to say. I didn't write this speech to tell you to use the word or to not use it. I'm just here working up the courage to speak my mind and start a conversation. But I hope we can all understand, whether you choose to use it or not, the N-word doesn't define who you are, because race is not a label, and it shouldn't divide us as a whole. Where you will go and what you will accomplish and who you want to be is up to you, because you have the irreplicable power of being an individual. I've come to learn just how much more important that is than trying to fit in. So from now on, when people ask me what I'm made of, I'll answer, I'm Iman. That is what I am. Nice to meet you. Thanks for listening.